Hey y'all, this is Kobe R. Rice, and this is episode number 35 of the epic fantastical journey of a black female sci-fi writer. This is Kobe R. Rice, and I'm coming back to you guys again after, only about a week of being away this time. I'm trying to keep to my commitment, and I'm just here to update you guys on what I've been doing for the past week. And today is actually going to be sort of a reflective podcast. And you guys know that I try to come to every podcast and every vlog, for those of you who are watching the video vlog version of this, with as much enthusiasm, happiness, and positivity as possible. But it was actually really hard this week to do that. Not saying there isn't a brighter side to life, but unless you're living under a rock, there are a lot of things happening in the world. And they affect me, they affect my writing, they affect my journey, they affect my inner peace and creativity. And it's always good, in my opinion, to talk about those things. Because you guys, everybody in their journey is going to have a point at which their happiness and their creative freedom is compromised. And that could be because of things that are going on personally in their lives, dealing with family issues, health issues is a big one, but also if you're dealing with social and political issues. And so we're going to talk about that today. Today being, by the way, this is Monday, August 14th, 3:42 p.m. Mountain Time. And we're going to talk today about when your creativity and when your very identity and your personhood is sort of under attack. Again, and that could be because it's a personal attack, it's a social attack, political attack, or what have you. So that's why I entitled this podcast Battles on All Fronts and Resistance Through Creativity. So if you're looking for sort of like a purely upbeat, happy podcast, this is probably not the one for you today. I'm sorry, boos, because I will be talking about what has been going on in Charlottesville. I will be talking about the theoretically impending nuclear war with North Korea and how that's being handled. And I also, of course, will give you guys updates on what's been going on creatively. So a part of my journey as a black sci-fi writer is to not only talk about my craft as a writer and as a filmmaker, as a game designer, and honing craft and developing craft, but it's also about my personal journey. And being that I am African American and a woman, that personal journey is going to look a lot different for me and for others who are like me or others who share similar qualities than it would for other people. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that if you're not really politically woke, if you think that we're in a post-racial society and post-racial world, especially after this weekend, if you have issues challenging larger systems dealing with, oppressive capitalism, not that I'm not necessarily anti-capitalist, but I am anti-oppressive capitalist. I think that you can be a socially minded capitalist and do good for the world, or you can be an oppressive capitalist and be an asshole to the world. But if you are sort of stuck on that dream that like our political system, our economic system should be unquestioned and should be uncritiqued, if you don't believe that there are any racial, religious, gender, sex-based, sexuality-based conflicts in this society, or you don't care about those things, if you're not woke to the fight against supremacy, particularly against white supremacy in this society and the supremacy of other institutions that basically oppress people and limit their life chances, then this is not going to be the episode for you. And overall, this is probably not going to be the podcast for you, because again, my journey as a black sci-fi writer is going to look a lot different than yours. And if your journey is basically about sticking your head in the sand and not really recognizing the important issues going on in this world, then you're going to find that my episodes are going to be disturbing to you, or a shock to your system, or just uncomfortable for you if you live in a very comfortable world. And so that's just a forewarning. I'm not trying to run anybody off. I'm not trying to dismiss anyone, but I am being very real because this is my platform, this is my podcast, and I'm going to be as real and as honest and as open and as critical, like constructively critical as possible. So having said all of that and giving you the caveat, we're going to talk about the Trump administration from an as objective point of view as I possibly can, just from like a strategy, political point of view. I mean, if you voted for him, fine, whatever, but you really have to, in my opinion, acknowledge that the way he's handling Kim Jong-un and the North Korea nuclear situation is not very comforting for the American people, and certainly not very comforting for our troops who are already overseas fighting for a variety of reasons. But that's just my opinion. You can always disagree with me on that if you decide to stick around. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about white supremacy, and we're going to talk about racism, we're going to talk about bigotry, we're going to talk about homophobia, homosexuality, and how it has been demonized in this country. We're going to talk about anti-Semitism. We're going to talk about transphobia, all these things that have come to bear on our lives yet again in this country that's supposed to be free, and that's supposed to be the quote-unquote melting pot of the world, which it's not. It's never been. I've always known that. I don't know if you guys have always known that, but we'll be talking about those issues. And again, if you're not woke, this is not the podcast for you. Okay, so before I get into all of that, though, let's just do like some light, superficial, how's the weather type of shit. Oh, also, FYI, this podcast may have explicit language in it because, again, I'm coming very raw and real to you. So keep that out there. It might not be safe for work. Actually, it's probably not safe for work, and it might not be safe for your children, depending on, how old they are. Okay, so even in the midst of all the crazy stuff that has been happening, I have found ways to make some sort of progress. It's been actually quite difficult, to be honest with you. But basically, the big things that I've been working on are, one, that I did a lot of world building and language creation for the Books of Ezekiel series, and that actually really kept my spirits up. It kept my hopes up, because as I watched the world around me kind of like start to collapse in a very real manner, being able to sit down in a quiet space and create something beautiful that was just my own, and that did not exist in the world before and is not based off of destruction, was actually very, very wonderful. So I worked on the political structure of the Books of Ezekiel world. I worked on the characters in the world, and most importantly, actually not most importantly, but most significantly, I worked on creating the language of Mishnai, which is the language of the Mesha in the Books of Ezekiel. And if you haven't read the Books of Ezekiel, that's fine. You'll find out who the Mesha are and why they're here, what they do, little by little as the series progresses. And in the first two books, you find out a little bit about them, and you'll find out even more as the series opens up. But they have their own language, and it's very fun creating their language. And it also just helps me to like sort of practice my own language skills. I mean, a lot of you might not know this, but I wouldn't consider myself a completely fluent polyglot, but I have studied several languages at this point, and it's great. I feel as though if you dropped me in any portion of the world, I can pretty much survive and then develop a very strong proficiency and fluency in any of those languages, but that I have at least very solid working knowledge and grasp of 7 languages so far, 3 of which I'm relatively proficient and fluent in. But that remains to be seen. Sometimes I get my skills tested and I'm a little rusty. But having that experience behind me of studying lots of languages has helped me to create a new language. It's actually been integral in helping me to create a new language, because I understand the different ways in which language works in different contexts, and it's really awesome. So that's been really fun, just creating and frolicking in that area. And I'm looking at my note card today. I wrote over 7,000 words this week. Actually, 7,270 words, which wasn't as much as I would have liked. I would have liked to hit at least 10,000, but I'm actually really happy about the number of words I wrote, considering that this week was extremely difficult for me emotionally and just time-wise too, because again, grad school is coming up, so I'm like scrambling to get ready. I also like have my kid most of the time this week, and so, that was pretty good. I'm not going to knock myself too hard for that. I was also working on, in addition to my badass language building and world building, I actually started to continue creating what's called the Badass World Building Lab, and that's actually an entire like portable laboratory, if you will, for the creation of sci-fi and fantasy worlds. And it's essentially a course that I'm putting together that I'm really, really excited about. And each part of the course will help you to develop anything you need in your world. I mean, there's like questionnaires, there's worksheets, there's, a whole bunch of different things that you can use to create like the government of your new world, ecosystem, social life, political system, law enforcement system, magic system, science systems, creating different civilizations and their cultures. It will help you create religions. It will really help you create a lot of the things that are required for for building a civilization and an entire world from the ground up. And so I'm really excited about this. This is one of the labs and courses that will be available at The Bohemian Badass. And basically, it's kind of like having, I would say like an instant world building kit at your disposal. That's why I call it a lab, because it's kind of really fun to get in there and answer questions and whatnot. And I think it would be really helpful for authors, even like people who are not authors, like game designers, anybody who has to be in a position where they're creating an entirely different new world. If you're creating high fantasy that requires the development of a whole new world, this is going to be perfect for you guys. And so, alongside of me building the world for the books of Ezekiel, I have been adding components and layers to the world building lab, and that will be for sale. I can't promise you guys when, but it is something that I'm working on at The Bohemian Badass. Hopefully within the next year, that's going to be available to you guys. There's another course product that I've been working at The Bohemian Badass, and I'll get into that in a second. But first of all, I wanted to talk about the new store. It's not brand new, and it hasn't been, it is brand new, but it hasn't been open yet. But in conjunction with the Badass World Building Lab, I had a really great idea for how to help other authors get sort of pre-developed world building assets for their high fantasy if they just don't have time or they just don't feel like building a world. I have decided that once the Badass World Building Lab is created, I'm going to open up a store. I'm not really sure what it's going to be called yet, but basically it'll be a store where you can literally go and buy a language that's already pre-made and pre-packaged for your for your world and for your race, whatever it is you're trying to build, or buy like a pre-written, pre-created religion or something like that. That's interesting. Just like buy different assets that are interesting. If you need somebody to like put together a planet from a topography and geographical perspective, like that's interesting. If you're doing like a space opera and you need like a system of planets and you have no idea where to start, I want the store to be your resource where you can literally go and buy entire galaxies that are pre-written, pre-created, and pre-packaged for you and your story. So basically, if you have a storyline and you have characters but you don't have planets, you buy that, you'll have proprietary rights to it as long as you give credit to the world builder who built that world for you. And then you can finish writing your series from there, and you don't really have to worry about creating all that from scratch. So I'm interested in opening up that sort of world building pre-finished assets store at rebelragdollpress.com as a part of our brand. And the great part about that is that I would love to invite lots of world builders, writers, artists, and creators to create these assets. And so after they're done creating whatever assets they're interested in, they can put it up for sale on the Rebel Ragdoll Press store and get a really, really fat commission. And I'm talking about like at least probably 70% commission, with just 30% going to Rebel Ragdoll Press because it's our store. It's basically our distribution fee and our maintenance fee. So I would love to do that. And of course, I would be selling my own pre-made assets there because world building is one of my favorite parts of writing sci-fi and fantasy. So, if I ever get bored, I might create an entire world that I'm not interested in using, but I'll put up on the store. Maybe one of you guys can buy it and decide that you want to use it in your story. So, I think that's really exciting and really fun and just a different way of engaging in story creation and collaborative building in a different way. And for those of you who think that this world building store is sort of cheating, I get it. A lot of the great minds of the world did everything when it came to their high fantasy or their, sprawling space operas or whatever. But honestly, we don't ever put anybody down in any other industry for co-writing or collaborating except for in the writing field. Like musicians can always collaborate and form bands with other musicians, and that's fine. Even solo musicians can feature each other on each other's tracks and albums or come together and create an album, and that's fine. Artists can come together and like work on a painting together or work on a sculpture together, then that's fine. But then somehow when we get to, and even especially for like big sprawling projects like filmmaking and game design, those downright require a team of at least 2 people, and that's like bare minimum. For film, I would say you need at least 5 people up to hundreds of people, and same thing for game design. I would say you should have at least 5 people up to a couple hundred. At least the bigger game and film franchises have those bigger teams. So every single other artistic endeavor in this, even dance, is, it can be collaborative and is performative with other people. But when it comes to writing, for whatever reason, we have this really weird self-destructive, idea that we should just be doing it all by ourselves at a computer, alone, drinking our drinking our sorrows and our writer's block away, smoking a cigarette, just like being miserable and emo. Somehow out of all of that angst, brilliance and genius comes out. And it's just so interesting and strange that we have this perception of how writing should be and how writers should act. Maybe because some of the greatest writers are also loners, but and that's great. But then also like you'll find, as I actually found out from listening to Jeff Goins recently, that some of the greatest writers didn't work solo. Some of them worked in groups or met at coffee shops and like kind of just sat together, and then even if they were writing something individually, they bounced ideas off of each other, or they would send their manuscripts to each other, or they would get feedback in some way on the process and support each other. And I think that this world building asset store is, in my opinion, a form of mutual support and, also like helping each other get recognized. Because I think it'd be really cool if, you could write an entire series and, the credit for writing and creating the story around that is all on you, obviously. But you would just give the world building credit to another author if you didn't build that world, and I don't see why that's a problem. And as a matter of fact, I'm seeing more and more co-written works. I would love to have a co-writer at some point, because I'm starting to realize that my skills are strong in certain areas and that they're not in other areas. But anyway, I feel like this is sort of rambly. I don't mean to get on a tangent, and I'm a little tired if you can't tell. But in conclusion, the world building store will happen at some point and will probably emerge a little bit after the world building lab comes out of the Bohemian Badass. I'm sorry, I don't mean to hiccup and burp into the podcast. It's kind of gross. I always do these after I've eaten so I can have the most energy, and that just doesn't turn out that great. So I should probably try something different. Okay, so moving on from that little embarrassing interlude. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about the last 2 things is that in addition to the world building lab sets that I'm putting together for the Bohemian Badass, I'm also in the process of continuing to work on the Plot Like a Badass course alongside the Plot Like a Badass ebook and workbook that accompanies the course. And so over the weekend, because I didn't really have much time to sit down and get in the zone and write, however, was able to outline a like, I don't know how many chapters it is at this point. Maybe it's like a 15 chapter, 6-part workbook and ebook to accompany the Plot Like a Badass course. So I actually laid down the entire outline this weekend, and it's looking pretty good. I'm really excited about it. And it's just another sort of way I'm trying to keep the Bohemian Badass going and moving forward, in addition to, doing the podcast and the blog and the weekly newsletter type of situation. So, little by little, I'm just crawling forward a little bit at a time. And what I did realize, I realized that I never updated you guys on my sort of journey with the Bohemian Badass. But the last time I talked to you guys about the Bohemian Badass, I was sort of wondering where it fit in my life and where it fit in the fempire that I'm building. And I decided that I'm not going to give up on it. What I'm going to do instead is just deliberately slow the Bohemian Badass down. So instead of trying to get out maybe, one blog post and one podcast a week and a newsletter a week, I might just try to do it every 2 weeks. Maybe a blog post every 2 weeks and a podcast every 2 weeks, just to start out while I am working on my courses and my ebooks, because I have to start it. I have to get on top of it in some way if the Bohemian Badass is going to be successful and going to grow as a brand. And me having these high expectations of producing a blog a week and a podcast a week and a weekly newsletter, those are great. But because I'm working on so many other things, I have to dial it back a little bit. But I do want to start blogging and posting and writing and, course building on a regular basis. And so in order to do that, I have to dial back my expectations. So ultimately, I will probably end up doing 2 blogs a month, 2 podcasts a month, and a monthly newsletter, right? So, my readers will hear from me, or I might do like a bi-weekly newsletter, actually. I don't like going a whole month without people hearing from me. And newsletters actually don't take that long to produce. So what I'll do is a bi-weekly newsletter, giving writing inspiration and craft inspiration, pointing people to the most recent podcast and the most recent blog post, and then I'll do another weekly newsletter with a follow-up, doing the same thing, closing out the month, but also pointing them to the past 2 podcasts of that month and the past 2 blog posts, and also giving them updates to the up-and-coming courses that I am creating and working on. And that'll be for that. Keep it simple. I will speed things up as time allows. But until then, that's sort of going to be the pace that I go at, because I have to start building my readership and my audience for that brand. So that's the plan for the Bohemian Badass. And in service to that plan, I'm working on my courses, basically. And then the final point, again, is that graduate school actually starts next Monday. And to be honest, I would say that I have mixed feelings about it. At this point, I don't. At this point, it's strange. It's like I'm ready to go back, but I'm sort of not really ready to go back because I know that my life is going to get 10 times busier. And I liked being able to reflect and take care of myself this summer and just deal with things and deal with myself this summer in a way that's a lot harder to do when you're in grad school and you're just sort of on the go and running on all cylinders. And a lot of changes have happened for this year, for this up and coming grad school year. Like I told you guys before, the friends that I was close with, they have departed the program, and so I have my other cohort members and they're great, but that's a heavy adjustment for me in terms of just navigating the program and having like a support system. And so it just makes me, it's not just that, there are other things that I am, interested in dealing with. Not interested, but I have to deal with in order to, make it through the program. And part of my solution is just to sort of keep my head down and just get through it. So, yeah, not the greatest plan. It's sort of like an isolating plan, which is why I look kind of like, and I feel a little sad about it. And I'm going to try to find a better way to kind of deal with all these changes that are happening. But part of my, part of my, I guess, like angst about the entire situation is that with academia comes a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of just having to fight for every single thing that you need or that you want. And sometimes you're tired of fighting. And we'll talk about that too in a second when I get into the real meat of the podcast, which is dealing with Charlottesville. But, I'm sometimes you're tired of fighting, and a part of that is really making me just want to just like keep my head down, keep my mouth shut, and just go through whatever it is I have to go through to get my degree. And, I don't know. I'm not trying to be negative because I don't know exactly what all the classes I'm taking are going to entail. But I guess I'll keep you guys posted. You guys will find out. So one last thing before I get into the Charlottesville thing. I realized a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, I talked about the 1 week novel challenge, and I never updated you guys on how that went. So actually, what happened is that I didn't meet the requirements, my personal requirements for having finished or having written enough words to fill an entire novel. I also didn't finish Hollow Point in one fell swoop. It's just not in me to do those kinds of writing sprints like other authors. I just learned that about myself. But I did get quite a lot written. I'm not going to lie about that. I think I got maybe 20,000 words written that week. And that was pretty significant, super significant. And that was exciting for me. At the same time, I did realize that I want to start expanding my my writing skills to dictation. And so, because, I'm going to be pretty busy this school year, next school year, anytime that I don't have any free time, which is most of the time, I'm going to be pretty busy. And I still want to keep up my word count. I mean, I'll be able to do 500 words a day, I believe, still. But I really want to keep my word count up to like 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. And realistically, the only way I can do that is by investing in some dictation software. So this semester, probably towards the beginning of October, I will be investing in the Dragon Naturally Speaking software. If you guys have been around multiple writer podcasts, you might have heard of Dragon, but basically it's a dictation software wherein you can teach Dragon your voice, your enunciation, all the things that you need in order to train the software to your voice, and then you can literally dictate your entire novels. And it's interesting because a lot of people experience like a learning curve dealing with dictation because you have to literally speak out the punctuation. And for me, I've just had a very interesting training on that front. It's going to be a curve, but not as much as other people because I already speak in punctuation. I use Siri a lot. And I also use the talk to text feature on iPhone a lot, which is kind of stupid, right? If you're going to like use the talk to text feature, you might as well just talk to the person on the phone. But there are times I really just don't want to talk to people on the phone, honestly. And I have a lot to say and I'm just like using talk to text. So I have actually gotten pretty fluent because of my social avoidance issues. I've gotten really fluent in using punctuation, speaking quickly, speaking clearly and enunciating my words so that Siri, who can be stupid sometimes, will not mince my words and not confuse my words. And I can get a lot written. And so I actually did like a dictation test on my Mac because if you guys don't know, the Mac itself has dictation software. And so not nearly as good as Dragon, like not even close. But I did a little test and I actually was like it felt pretty fluent to me, and I was actually flowing pretty well with my dictation on the Mac because I had already trained myself to speak with punctuation through my social avoidance and my talk to text on my phone. So this is going to be an exciting new threshold for me, basically dictating my novels. And I actually think I might write a lot better because I'm just speaking off of the cuff. I have a plan. You guys know I'm a plotter, but I'm speaking off of the cuff and just having the words spill out onto the page. Like it's gonna be a literal vomit draft, like quite literally a vomit draft, except the vomit is like art is made of words. And I find at least in my writing now and in my writing since forever, that the most raw and the realest and the best parts of my writing are always the parts where I'm not really thinking about it. It's just flowing. And so I'm really excited to see how Dragon is going to help me tap into that zone and tap into my personal ether, my emotional ether, my psychological ether, my creative ether, to just let the things that I need to say flow, and particularly to let the things that my characters say flow, because they each have their own distinctive voices. So stay tuned for that. I will update you guys probably in like a month or two on how that is going, and you guys can give me feedback, and I'll let you know. I'm excited about that, but I'm determined to keep up my writing, especially now that things in this country are going kind of crazy, and I want to get my writing done as much as I can, as quickly as I can. At least get the draft out on paper so I can then craft it into something. All right, so let's get into the issue today, and I'm really tired, so I'm not going to spend too much on the topic, but I am going to be very deep about and go sort of deeply into what's happening in Charlottesville. As you guys know, if you weren't aware already, over the weekend, a group of white nationalists and basically neo-Nazis, alt-right people, and conservatives did a march on the UVA campus and in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I just want to, again, give you guys a caveat. I do not lump alt-right protesters and believers and conservatives in with white nationalists and neo-Nazis. Like, let's make that very clear. Just because you have a conservative mindset and worldview does not make you a racist. It does not make you a bigot. It does not make you a white nationalist. However, these individuals who marched alongside these protesters in Charlottesville and at the UVA campus unfortunately tossed their hat into the neo-Nazi ring when they marched alongside these people, chanting phrases like, "You will not replace us," "White lives matter," "White power," etc., etc. And so even though if you, not you, but the proverbial you, if you're an alt-right or just a conservative person, and you don't hold the white nationalist beliefs of these groups, we have a saying in my community. I don't know if it's a widespread thing, but black people have a saying that says, "You lay down with dogs and you get up with fleas." So basically what that means is that it does not matter if you yourself are not infected with the disease, with the flea-like disease that is white supremacy and bigotry. If you lay down with people like that, if you yoke yourself with people like that, you might catch that disease, or you might you will, or at least you will have the impression of wearing the face of that disease. So if you guys know anything about fleas are very contagious. I hate saying it like that, because it's not like fleas themselves are a disease, but they carry disease. They're actually the reason why the Black Plague swept through Europe and basically killed everybody, or most people, because rats were running through the city, they were infected, and the fleas bit them and then went on to people and bit people. So the fleas are certainly the carriers of disease, and when you lay down with a dog that is infected with fleas, you might get the same diseases and the same afflictions that he himself has. And so I say that to say that even if you do not hold those beliefs, you should not yoke yourself with people who are propagating those, who are proponents of those beliefs, because basically you're going to get lumped in with everybody. And unfortunately, these protests broke out in Charlottesville with a surprisingly high number of white nationalists, and things got really crazy. They got violent. I personally prefer to call it the Charlottesville riot. I mean, to me, it wasn't really a protest, but that's just me. What I do know is that black people can't organize in defense of black lives and against police brutality without being called thugs, without being called, the N-word, without being called all these things. We can't even organize peacefully without people labeling us in a certain way, but somehow these angry, really racist nationalists could organize and literally march with torches in the dead of night onto a campus and into a park, beat people up, run people over and kill them, and still not be called what they are, which are terrorists and which are thugs. And so for me, this situation was very disheartening. There was some, I have mixed feelings about it, because parts of the situation were very disheartening and other parts were actually very uplifting for me. The disheartening part is obvious. One racist, let's call him what he is, got into his car and literally drove his car, I believe it was a Dodge Charger or Challenger, into a crowd of counter-protesters, severely wounding 19 of them and killing one of them. And I will say the victim's name on this podcast because she is worthy of that. She deserves that. She sacrificed her life fighting for something she believed in. Her name is Heather Heyer. She was 32. She was a paralegal, and she was also a social justice warrior. And I just give out all of my condolences, my prayers, and my love to Heather and her family. I'm very sorry for your loss. Not that they're probably not listening to this podcast, but I truly regret that her life was laid at the altar of history repeating itself. And it's just tragic that you cannot fight for what you believe in without having to put your life down for it. I mean, in some instances, it can be seen as honorable, but why resort to violence when it's not necessary? And this man, whose name I will not say on the podcast because he is not worthy of airtime, he basically forced 20 people to change their lives forever because he couldn't deal with the fact that they stood for something different than he did. And, for those of you who think I'm giving like a very biased account of the march, like, okay, I mean, I don't know where you're going to find, I mean, maybe at Fox News you might find someone who is trying to draw strength from this white nationalist protest or whatever, who thinks it's a good thing. But to me, this was just grotesque. And, again, it just shows me a lot of different things. It shows me hope, which, again, I'll get to. But it also shows me I'm also disheartened because it's like not only does this really angry, bigoted hate exist in our country still, but it's still taking lives. And it still exists and shows us the hypocrisy of our nation today. We can stop and frisk black men at will, and people don't bat an eye, and they think that we deserve to get stopped and frisked. But then you can have a group of hundreds of white nationalists storm a campus. Maybe storm is a strong word. March onto a campus, march into a park, injure people, and actually kill someone. And still not have to bear the label of being thugs and terrorists. Still not have, their headquarters, the white nationalist headquarters and KKK satellite sites raided by the FBI. Some of them are. Some of them really are raided by the FBI, usually the ones that are on the brink of trying to create a terrorist attack. But, the KKK is largely left alone in this country. Meanwhile, the Black Lives Matter movement, even though it's a response to something that everybody should care about, which is police brutality, like, we're constantly targeted in the media and on social media and in rhetoric about what we stand for, which is insane to me. Like, why would you want to have brutal police? Like, it's like I really do respect cops. I can't say that I have a deep love for all cops. I love good cops. I don't love bad cops, and I don't love corrupt cops, and neither should you. You shouldn't like cop corruption, because that means that at any point you could be the victim of cop corruption. And because you did not stand up and fight for it, I'm sorry, you would have invited that evil right into your own house. And we saw that very clearly when Muhammad Noor accidentally shot Justine Damon. Rest her soul, because she certainly did not deserve to be killed over a misunderstanding, or over this officer potentially not being trained as well as he should, or being too shaky, or drawing his gun too soon. She should not have been killed that way. But the bottom line is that and we've been seeing a lot of examples recently, and you guys may know this about me or not. I'm not particularly religious, but I do believe in the universe giving people a wake-up call when necessary. And we're now starting to see police brutality, lack of police training, and also bigotry, racism, and white nationalism coming home to roost, not in the black community specifically and only, but in the white community. And so this is something that, because we let this go on for so long, the people that you thought would be protected by keeping minorities down are now becoming the people that are also being targeted by these same groups who have no respect for anybody but themselves, who have no love for anybody but themselves, who care about no one but themselves with regard to keeping themselves in power. And I think, unfortunately, and I didn't want this to have to happen, but unfortunately, the communities around us, particularly the white communities, didn't realize that these things, police brutality and racism, were a real problem until it started to come and snatch the lives of their own. So now you realize, and this is me I'm not saying ha ha, good for you. I feel like these deaths are tragic. I also feel as though the deaths of African Americans, Muslims, people of color, gay people, LGBTQ people, those are also tragic, and they also have been tragic for a long time, those deaths and that suffering. But we're finally getting the majority in this country to realize, oh snap, we're not in a post-racial society. Oh snap, police brutality might actually be a problem, an objective problem that affects more people than just the people that we're afraid of, which are the black people and people of color and the Muslims. And so it just makes me angry that it took us this long, and it took us, this is what it took for us to wake up as a country. Like, seriously, it's just disheartening as hell. It's very disheartening. And so I'm really angry about that. I'm angry that this even happened over the weekend. And, this runs up against some of my own values, because I believe very strongly, as a writer, I believe super strongly, I'm a zealot, as a matter of fact, for the First Amendment, period. Like, you can basically, I'm as crazy about the First Amendment as gun owners are about the Second Amendment, okay? Like, I am a zealot. I will stand up to defend the right to free speech and free assembly to the day I die. Like, that is something I will never have removed from the Constitution, ever. So basically, I'm as crazy about the First Amendment as some of you guys might be about gun ownership. And I do not believe for a second that these white supremacist groups should not be allowed to speak. They should, even though I think that they're scum, even though I think that what they have to say is garbage. They feel like people like me shouldn't even exist. I should be on a plantation somewhere, subjugated, getting raped and beaten by like a master, or I should just be at the bottom of the totem pole in this society. This is what they think about me as a black person without even knowing who I am. And of course, I think that they're scum. Of course, I think that they're genocidists and that they should be not on this planet. Let's put it that way. But I would never say that they don't have the right to free speech. What I would say, though, is that the way that the Charlottesville protests were handled by the law and by the local sort of political situation was inappropriate. Because, again, Black Lives Matter protesters can literally gather on a street corner and you'll have 10 to 20 cops there ready to just, keep us in line. But you can have an entire mob, and I'm going to call them that because that's what they were, an entire mob marching through a town with torches, shouting racial slurs, shouting, white power, white lives matter, shouting, you will not replace us, marching onto a campus with students on it. And there's little to no police presence to mitigate that. Why? You know, like, why isn't there a mandate in every state that regardless of how big the assembly is or what color the assembly is, that there should be a certain number of police officers ready to take action? You know, why aren't they treating all protesters the same, who have the same potential to be violent? Mind you, just to put out there too, and this is not really supposed to be about Black Lives Matter, but I had to make the comparison because the way that these two movements are being treated is ridiculous, because they should be being treated the same. But like, if you can name one victim, one murder victim of a Black Lives Matter protest, I mean a protest, not some free radical person going into, like, you know, a place and shooting up people or anything like that. I'm talking about if you can name one murder victim that was killed at a Black Lives Matter protest, I will literally recant all the things I'm saying about the lack of equality between how these two groups are treated. But not a single Black Lives Matters protest or gathering has resulted in the murder of someone, whereas this one gathering really resulted in this woman losing her life. And I don't even like saying losing her life because I feel like that's disingenuous. I think the media itself also has played a large role in helping to perpetuate a lot of this violence, not because they're not reporting on the truth, but they're not reporting on all the truths. And they also tend to report on the things that will get them the most viewership. Basically, it's a capitalist-based and capitalist-run media, which ultimately means that it's going to be skewed because certain things, certain truths and certain stories make more money and get more viewership than other stories and truths. So even if you're reporting on the truth, you're not reporting on all the truth consistently and equally. And the media, in a lot of ways, even though, again, I believe in freedom of press, freedom of speech, they really need to be checked. They need to be checked in terms of like where they're reporting and not. So this is why I get my news from a variety of sources. I look at different local news stations, bloggers, podcasts, national news. I try my best to get as many, you know, I try to get my news from as many directions as possible, basically. It's not a perfect process, but it's a better process than just watching CNN all the time. Except for Fox News. I just can't stomach Fox News because they just don't even use real facts. So, but that's, you know, neither here nor there, I guess. But basically, the biggest thing that I noticed, and this, we'll get to the hope part of this whole situation, is that the thing that made me proud was that most of the counter protesters against these Nazis were white. And that really made me feel a lot of hope in my heart in terms of white people understanding the difference between themselves and the larger white supremacist institution in which we live, being able to question that, critique that, and challenge that without feeling personally attacked, without feeling as though they're being called racist, by realizing that when we talk about and criticize white supremacy, that we are not criticizing and pointing our fingers at individuals. We are pointing at a system in which we are all born into. We are all subject to. Blacks and whites, Christians and Muslims, you know, men and women, transgender and non-transgender. We are all born into this heteronormative, white supremacist capitalist system that puts us all at different rungs on the ladder, period. And I don't care what you have to say about life isn't fair, so deal with it. No, we don't have to fucking deal with it. Excuse my French. If there's something not right in the world, I'm a free thinking human being. That's the point of being in a free damn country, is to be able to look at the world and then take action to try to fix what is wrong with this world. All right? If people in history had sat around and just, quote, dealt with, end quote, how things were, most of us wouldn't even be in this country. We would still be under British rule, because the American colonists would have said, oh, well, I guess we can't do anything about these Brits taxing us and, you know, pimping us from, 3,000 miles away. So we're just going to sit and take it. No, we wouldn't be here as a country if our predecessors thought that way. I would still be in some field somewhere picking cotton if my predecessors hadn't said, we are not going to just deal with being slaves and just accept the status quo. So if you're on the podcast here, like thinking, oh, well, though life's not fair, deal with it. then honestly, fuck you and get off my podcast, because you are not going to be amongst the people in this world that make a difference and make a change. You're just here just to take a look around and take a tour and then die and be nothing, amongst thousands of others who just are, not trying to push forward history. And that's fine, but don't sit and try to tell other movers and shakers like us that we're doing the wrong thing. No, you leave the leaders to lead the movers and shakers to move and shake, leave the ballers to ball, and you go live your life and live and die and not care. But like, don't have anything to say about us moving and pushing this movement forward. But as I was saying, it made me feel very good in my heart to see that we have white allies. Now, not everybody was down there for the same reasons. Everybody was, people were there because they truly believe in equality, and they truly believe that they do not want this element in their community. Other people that were down there, though, because even though they don't necessarily want to fight for equality, they just do not want to be associated with a racist movement. And I respect that. Whatever is going to get you down there fighting the good fight, by all means, fight that good fight, boo. We need every last one of you guys on the field with us to push this country in a better direction. But a lot of white people are very tired of being slapped with the racist label. Or they're just tired of it. They're tired of these extremist groups speaking for them on their behalf, assuming that just because they share the same skin color, they must share the same values. And I really have so much respect to all the allies and counter-protesters who went down to Charlottesville, who went down to UVA to fight against this fascist, psychotic group and what they stood for. And y'all were getting real gangster. I mean, I don't think people of color could have done half of what you guys are doing. I mean, I saw you guys mobbing folks. I saw you guys throwing some punches. I mean, of course, the neo-Nazis were doing the same thing. Of course, that's what they do. But some of y'all were getting kind of cray-cray. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, honestly, I had never seen white people so damn angry. It was like, I was sitting here, like, upset, but also just kind of like, like I was just, like I had seen a damn unicorn. I was like, because in the media you usually see like the quote unquote angry black woman and like, the black buck Sambo Mandingo dude, or the black, you used to see black violence because that's overrepresented in media. And so when you see somebody else who's not you being represented in a really sort of barbaric, animalistic way, it's just kind of like, whoa, this is new. I guess white people get angry too. And y'all were angry. Y'all were angry in Charlottesville at those Nazis. And so it was just an incredible show of solidarity. And I appreciate you. I really do, for fighting against this evil that's trying to infect our country. Moving forward, I have no idea how to approach the next topic, which is North Korea and Trump just, Kim Jong-un and Trump just kind of like having this really weird dick measuring contest. I mean, I just don't know what's going on. The fact that like these two individuals are literally like a few words and a push away from launching nuclear warfare is very terrifying to me. Of course, my logical brain feels like realistically it probably won't happen, but who knows? I mean, who knows? If it's financially profitable for Trump and all of his constituents, why wouldn't we? War costs. I mean, war makes a lot of money. Imagine all the contractors after, the nuclear winter has settled and it's gone, just coming in to rebuild these entire cities according to what they want them to look like and getting the money from the government to do so. So, I'm not trying to make you guys scared, but you guys should, even if you voted for Trump, you should definitely be concerned with this really strange sort of college level, actually not even college level, high school level dick measuring contest and pissing contest that is happening between the presidents of these two very dangerous nations. And, frankly, even if you're a conservative and you voted for him, a lot of conservatives have family in the military. I would hope that you don't want your family members sent over into another war, especially if it's going to be a nuclear war, because who the hell knows what that's going to look like. So, I mean, just for the sake of the preservation of freaking humanity and making sure that Americans don't go extinct, like, I would hope that you are starting to look at Trump's actions more critically. Now, I'm hoping, that this is all just political theater, and that Kim Jong-un and that Trump just have to show power to their people and show. And I hope that Trump is just trying to show all of you guys who voted for him that he's, gonna stand up to these world bullies, even though we're the biggest bully in the damn world. We've upset and we've destabilized more nations on this planet than I would say any other nation in the world, probably aside from the British. And I mean, in the British, I'm talking about historically colonizing places in terms of destabilizing the current populations there. But I mean, we literally were responsible for destabilizing a large number of African nations, a large number of Latin American and Asian nations, but they don't want you to know about that. But read some books and you'll find out how we played a hand in those developing, quote, third world countries and why they can't get anywhere. A lot of that had to do with us. Anyway, so I hope that this is just political theater and Trump is just showing you guys that you made a good choice in picking a man who's going to, quote, stand for his country and not be bullied. I hope that it's that, because if it's not, none of us will be voting for anybody come 2020, because he would have fucking got us all nuked, and that's terrifying. So one last point before I wrap up is I want you guys to really, in all of this uncertainty and craziness, because in my heart, I feel like this is kind of just the beginning of these nationalist movements, of these sort of larger macro political upheavals. I feel as though even though the Charlottesville protesters, eventually got dispersed, I feel like this is only going to give fuel to all of the other satellite sites of white nationalism in this country. Even though our country may be headed into some darker times, I do want you to try your best to stay uplifted, stay focused, stay creative, and stay resistant through your art. It's very important, because when things seem to be getting destroyed and withering away, the only way to fight death and destruction is through life and creation. Ultimately, they're hand in hand. Life cannot exist without death, but death can't really exist without life as well. Without life, death itself dies. So, that's a good line, actually. I'm going to put that in my novel, because death is a big theme in the books of Ezekiel. So I like that. Without life, death itself dies. I like that. But it's true. And, we just need to, as artists, whatever art you're into, you just stay in the game. Use what's happening in your life, in the world, in our society, as just a way to, just as a learning experience, as life experience, and as a different view on the world. Take your experiences, take your emotions, and channel them as much as you can into your art. I know for a fact that, this idea that I'm working on called Immortal, which is my serialized novel / TV series that I'm writing, urban fantasy series. It was born 2 years ago, and I knew sort of what I wanted it to be about. I knew what the core premise was going to be, but the past 2 years have certainly literally given a skeleton and a backbone and a foundation. It's given roots to Immortal in a way that probably might have never happened had these things not gone on. And that's not to say that it couldn't have been a good series without all this devastation. I'm not saying that, but I'm really trying my best to channel all of my sadness and sorrow and just dismay into something powerful that can move people, that can comfort people, that can give people strength, that can educate, entertain, and empower. And that's going to be the point of Immortal. And so I just want you to keep writing as much as you can. Even if it's just a journal entry, just journal, get out what you're feeling onto paper. Because if you don't use it now, you can use it later. And maybe your feelings of angst, worry, anxiety can be translated into real experiences and emotions that will leap off of the page if you're writing it into a story. I know that that's what happens for me. So I really want you guys to feel empowered, Get around people that you love, who love and support you unconditionally, who support your creativity unconditionally, and keep writing, keep creating, just keep moving forward with your art, no matter what. No matter what, because knowledge is powerful, of course, it's power, but beyond that cliche, it's also immortal. Once you write something down and you put it out in the world, once you create something like an intellectual property and put it out in the world, and then you let people know that it's out in the world, unless an entire civilization is completely erased, your words will exist for all time, you know? And that's especially true now that we store information and data digitally, and on clouds, as opposed to just in hard copy books. So even if, something did happen and all the books were burned, or, things were destroyed, there's somewhere your words would have been, your energy would have been translated into that creative output that is out in the world and would have made the place a better place for it. So, and that's why knowledge is powerful, not because it's only power, but it's because it can't literally be destroyed. Once you hear a story, once you learn something, once you experience something, it cannot be unheard, it cannot be unlearned, and it can't be unexperienced. So in that way, the pursuit of knowledge and the creation of knowledge and words in itself is immortal and is immortality. And I want you guys to keep journeying towards your own personal immortality, because the things around you will die. The things that you love, and I hate to be morbid, but it's true, will die. You at some point, everybody will die at some point. And you don't want to have died with everything that is so special and unique in you. You don't want all that still inside of your mind and your heart when you go. So do that. And I would give you this advice even if things weren't politically crazy and socially crazy. But it's especially true now that we see that all these things are happening. People are just losing their lives just for existing. And, we really need to just get serious about our art. And getting serious means getting serious about just putting it out there. So that's all I have to say. I'm exhausted. I have to cook dinner, and then I have to do my mommy thing, and we're just going to relax and try to take it easy today, because I just need this week just to recuperate from last week, recuperate from this weekend, and from everything that's been happening. And I hope that you take some time for some self-care as well. And I hope you take some time to really evaluate where you stand on all of these issues, and to really start conversations both in person but also through your art. So giving you guys lots of love. That's what we need right now, is love and creativity and closeness and understanding. So I'm giving you guys that. I thank you for sticking with me throughout this podcast, and hopefully next week will be far more upbeat than this week. But until then, write on, rock on, stay badass, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye. Stay safe.